If your turbo diesel blows before 50,000 miles, it is almost never bad engineering. It is a bad habit. 17 common mistakes are silently destroying your turbocharger, your fuel system, and your emissions from the inside out. If your turbo already whines louder than usual, that is not a diesel being a diesel. That is a bearing surface grinding itself apart while you drive. Every single one is fixable. I saved the most dangerous myth for last. It has killed more turbochargers than any mechanical defect in history. Let us get right into it. Mistake number 17 is ignoring boost pipe leaks. The turbo pushes compressed air through intercooler hoses, boots, and clamps before it reaches the intake manifold. Every connection is a potential failure point. Over time, rubber boots become brittle from engine heat. They crack, clamps loosen. When these leak, pressurized air escapes. The turbo has to spin harder and faster to build the same boost. That extra work generates heat and accelerates bearing wear. The engine receives less dense air. The computer dumps more fuel to compensate, which drives exhaust temperatures even higher. Look for poor acceleration, increased black smoke, or loud whistles under the hood. You might even see a P0299 underboost trouble code. Visual inspection misses small cracks. Professional mechanics use smoke machines to find these invisible leaks. Catching a $10 cracked hose before it kills a $2,000 turbo is the cheapest insurance you can buy. This next mistake feeds dirt directly into your boosted diesel engine. Mistake number 16 is running clogged or physically broken air filters. Most owners only check filters based on mileage. They rarely look inside the airbox for physical damage. A clogged filter starves the engine of oxygen. Combustion suffers. The engine produces thick soot that accelerates emissions filter clogging downstream. But a broken airbox is even worse. Some factory airboxes use thin plastic support ribs. Over time, that plastic becomes brittle and snaps. Fragments enter the intake stream. If they strike the turbo compressor wheel, they shatter the blades instantly. Cheap aftermarket turbo diesel filters with weak rubber seals do the same thing. They let fine dust bypass the element entirely. That dust erodes the compressor wheel like sandblasting media. The damage is cumulative and completely irreversible. Low-mounted cold air intakes pose another threat. They sit near the ground and expose the intake to water splash from puddles or heavy rain. That puts the engine at serious risk of hydrolock. Service turbo diesel filters based on local driving conditions, not just mileage. Inspect the plastic housing every single time you swap a filter. This next mistake ruins the most expensive part of the turbo diesel truck. Mistake number 15 is skipping diesel injector and fuel filter service. Many owners follow factory maintenance schedules blindly. Heavy towing and stop-and-go traffic demand much shorter intervals. Here is why this matters so much. Modern common rail turbo diesel engines use the fuel itself to lubricate the high-pressure pump. A clogged fuel filter restricts flow and directly starves that pump of its only protection. Late filter changes lead to catastrophic pump failure. When the pump internals shear apart, metallic shrapnel shoots through the entire fuel system. The rails, the injectors, the lines. A single pump failure costs thousands. Many experienced owners replace primary fuel filters every 10,000 miles to stay ahead of this. Worn diesel injectors compound the damage. When the delicate nozzle rings degrade, the fuel spray turns into irregular streams instead of a fine mist. That poor atomization causes incomplete combustion and excess soot that fouls the turbo vanes and chokes the emissions filter. Change fuel filters strictly on schedule. Get diesel injectors flow tested if black smoke increases or fuel economy drops suddenly. This next mistake leaves turbocharged diesel owners stranded on the coldest morning of the year. Mistake number 14 is ignoring cold weather preparation. Cold starts are brutal. Thick, freezing oil settles in the oil pan overnight. It cannot immediately coat the moving parts in a protective film. The diesel engine runs unprotected until the oil warms up. Always use a manufacturer-approved synthetic oil viscosity that matches the local winter climate. Properly functioning glow plugs are also critical. They preheat the combustion chambers so the fuel ignites instantly. Dead glow plugs cause hard starts and rough cold engine shaking. In freezing climates, plug in a block heater. It keeps the coolant and oil warm overnight so the oil flows instantly when you turn the key. You also need winterized diesel fuel or an anti-gel treatment. Summer-grade diesel turns into thick wax in the cold and clogs fuel filters completely. The drivetrain has limits, and this next mistake pushes way past them. Mistake number 13 is repeatedly bouncing off the rev limiter. Diesel engines are entirely different from gasoline engines. Hitting the rev limiter in a diesel is far more violent. Diesels have heavy internal parts. They thrive on low-end torque. When you hit the rev limiter, the ECU violently shuts off the fuel supply. That sudden fuel cut makes the heavy crankshaft and connecting rods whip back and forth. This sends destructive twisting forces and shock waves hammering through the bearings and drivetrain. Never disable the factory rev limiter. Aftermarket tuning that removes these safeguards exposes the engine to literal piston and valve collisions. Shift long before the needle hits the red zone. On any turbo diesel, ignoring noises costs thousands. Mistake number 12 is ignoring early turbo warning signs. When owners hear a new noise, they convince themselves they can deal with it later. By the time they act, the damage has cascaded into the engine block. A sudden loss of pulling power means boost is escaping. New whining, metallic grinding, or a changing whistle pitch means the bearings are wearing out or the compressor blades are damaged. Exhaust smoke tells you exactly what is failing. Blue smoke means oil is blowing past blown turbo seals. Black smoke means a rich fuel burn or a starved airway. White smoke often means coolant is leaking into the turbo itself. If you see these symptoms, stop driving immediately. A failing turbo that shatters sends shrapnel straight into the engine block. Mistake number 11 is demanding full power before proper warm-up. Remember that thick, cold oil problem from mistake 14? It gets even worse when you add a heavy load. If you hitch a trailer and floor it onto the highway immediately, the turbo spins to full speed on a bone-dry bearing surface. That is how you create permanent damage in the first 5 minutes of a drive. Coolant heats up much faster than oil. The dashboard temperature gauge might read dead center, but the oil is still cold and thick. Wait until oil temperature reaches at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit before towing or accelerating hard. Let the engine idle briefly after startup, then drive gently until the oil is fully warm. If towing with an automatic, always engage tow or haul mode before pulling away. Mistake number 10 is buying cheap diesel fuel. Diesel fuel rots quickly. If it sits in underground tanks at a rundown gas station for months, it absorbs groundwater and grows actual biological algae. That contaminated fuel strips the lubricating film right off the high-pressure pump internals. The metal parts wear down and eventually shatter, sending debris through the entire injection system. Always purchase fuel from busy truck stops, where the inventory cycles out quickly. Never fill up from farm tanks or plastic cans that have sat baking in the sun for months. And never run the tank near empty. A low fuel level lets moisture condense on the inside walls of the tank, breeding corrosion and bacteria. Water creates instant destruction inside a diesel engine. Mistake number 9 is driving through deep water fast. Diesel engines compress air to extreme pressures to ignite fuel. If you suck a puddle of water into the intake box, it enters the engine cylinders. Water physically cannot be compressed. When the piston travels upward on the compression stroke, it slams into an incompressible wall of liquid. This is called hydrolock. It instantly bends connecting rods, shatters pistons, and cracks cast iron engine blocks. If you absolutely must drive through water, know the depth first. Know exactly how high the air intake sits. Maintain a slow, steady walking pace to push a gentle wave ahead of the bumper. Never accelerate aggressively into standing water. And if the engine suddenly stalls mid-crossing, do not crank the starter. Cranking against a hydro-locked engine bends the rods even further. This next mistake applies to every turbo diesel owner who has ever replaced a turbo. Fix the disease, not the symptom. Mistake number 8 is replacing a blown turbo without diagnosing what actually killed it. Turbos rarely die of old age. They are murdered by oil starvation, foreign object damage, or extreme exhaust heat. If the turbo dies because a tiny oil line got clogged with carbon, and you simply bolt a brand new $2,000 turbo onto the engine, that new turbo will die exactly the same way, sometimes in just 20 minutes. You must act like a detective before bolting on a new part. Clean and flush all oil feed lines, return tubes, and intake pipes. Check the emissions filter back pressure, inspect diesel injector health. A shiny new turbo cannot survive the same toxic environment that killed the old one. Tuners steal reliability for cheap power. And this next mistake is how. Mistake number 7. Flashing an aggressive tune without upgrading the physical hardware. Tuning boxes alter injection timing, crank up the fuel pressure, and force the turbo to push higher boost. Factory head bolts, transmission clutches, and stock turbos are not built to hold those pressures permanently. Stock turbos will spin far past their design limit and shatter. Factory head gaskets will eventually blow under cylinder pressures they were never engineered to contain. Some cheap tuner boxes scramble the electronic control modules, making future diagnostics impossible for any mechanic. If you rewrite the software to produce street racing power, you must pay to reinforce the metal to match. And never ignore limp mode. That is the computer desperately trying to save the engine from the damage the tune is causing. We are now into the top 6. These are the silent killers. The habits that look completely harmless until they hand you a repair bill that totals the truck. In any turbocharged diesel, oil changes dictate engine life. Mistake number 6. Stretching oil change intervals. Many owners push 10,000 or 15,000 miles between changes because an outdated manual told them it was safe. Every diesel engine blows black soot past the piston rings and down into the oil pan. The oil traps that soot like a net catches debris. But eventually, the net is so full that every fiber becomes an abrasive grinding surface. That contaminated oil grinds down turbo bearings and hydraulic lifters with every revolution. Severe duty driving, long idling, heavy towing, and short commutes multiply soot production rapidly. Change oil based on how hard the truck works, not just miles on the dashboard. Send a small oil sample to a laboratory. They will tell you exactly how much soot and raw fuel are hiding in the oil, allowing you to set a scientifically accurate change interval. Oil starvation kills a turbo instantly. Mistake number 5. Driving while low on oil. Big turbo diesels often hold more than 3 whole gallons of engine oil. Small leaks from the rear main seal or the pan gasket look minor on the concrete driveway, but they deplete the safety reserve over time. If the level drops low enough, the oil pump sucks in air during hard cornering or hard braking. This causes a momentary loss of oil pressure. The engine bearings might survive a brief drop, but the turbo cannot. At those rotational speeds, even a split second without oil pressure causes permanent bearing damage. Pull the oil dipstick every single time you fill up with diesel fuel. It takes 10 seconds. That 10 seconds could save you thousands. Turbo diesel emission systems hate short trips. Mistake number 4. Using a heavy-duty diesel truck for 5-minute grocery runs. The emissions filter is incredibly sensitive. Your diesel particulate filter captures soot from every combustion cycle. It needs sustained high exhaust temperatures to burn that soot into ash. This cleaning process is called regeneration, and it takes 20 to 40 continuous minutes of highway driving to complete. If you only drive short distances around town, the exhaust never gets hot enough. The filter eventually clogs completely solid. A heavily clogged filter acts like a cork in the exhaust pipe. It traps heat and suffocates the turbocharger. And never interrupt an active regeneration cycle. If the engine idle rises on its own, or you smell a sharp, hot exhaust odor while parked, that is a regen in progress. Let it finish. When you shut the engine off mid-cycle, you prevent the filter from cleaning itself. Repeated interruptions cause the filter to clog beyond what the engine can clean on its own. Take the truck for a sustained highway drive at least once a week. We are now in the top 3. If you fix nothing else after watching this video, fix these 3 habits. They cause more turbo diesel engine damage than the other 14 combined. Do not ignore the dashboard. Mistake number 3. Driving with an active check engine light. Many dashboard codes relate directly to the fragile sensors that control turbocharger boost and fuel rail pressure. The exhaust back pressure sensor tells the computer exactly how much pressure exists in the exhaust manifold. If that sensor clogs with soot or dies, the computer goes blind. It cannot adjust the variable geometry turbo vanes correctly. The turbo might overboost and snap the shaft, or underboost and cause dangerous exhaust temperatures. We see this in the real world constantly. On the Ford 6-liter Power Stroke, ignoring high exhaust temperatures causes the variable turbo vanes to corrode and stick wide open. This creates sudden boost spikes up to 40 pounds per square inch, which instantly blows head gaskets. The same thing happens in smaller cars like the Volkswagen 1.9 TDI. Carbon buildup on the vanes causes the engine to throw limp mode codes and jerk violently under hard acceleration, while the turbo chirps from compressor surge. In both cases, the sensors and the physical actuators were fighting each other. Address trouble codes the same day they appear. A $50 sensor replacement can prevent a catastrophic engine rebuild. This next habit is the oldest myth in the turbo diesel world, and it refuses to die. Mistake number 2. Letting the truck idle for 20 minutes in the driveway to warm up. Long idling routines were completely necessary for old mechanical farm diesels from the 1990s, but modern electronic engines stabilize cold starts in seconds. When you idle a modern turbocharged diesel for 20 minutes, the engine stays dangerously cold for far too long. The heavy iron cylinders do not get hot enough to actually burn all the injected fuel. That raw, unburned diesel fuel acts like a chemical solvent. It washes down the cylinder walls, completely strips away the lubricating engine oil, and dilutes the oil pan. This destructive process is called wet stacking. It ruins piston rings and rapidly breaks down the engine oil. Start the truck. Wait 30 to 60 seconds for the oil pressure gauge to move. Then put it in gear and begin driving gently. Moving the truck under a light load warms the engine far faster and far safer than just sitting there idling. The biggest myth of all, and the most destructive. Now we have reached mistake number 1, the single most damaging habit in the entire diesel world, shutting off the engine immediately after pulling a heavy load. Here is something most people never think about. The turbo shaft does not ride on solid bearings. It floats on a microscopically thin film of pressurized engine oil. As long as the engine is running, that oil film keeps the metal parts from ever touching. The moment you turn the key off, that film vanishes. When you pull off the highway after towing, the turbo is glowing red hot. The heavy iron housing is saturated with thermal energy. If you kill the engine, the oil pump stops, coolant flow stops, but all that stored heat has nowhere to go. The trapped oil sitting inside the center housing begins to oxidize. It hardens into carbon coke that sticks to the bearing journals and narrows the oil return passages. Every hot shutdown adds another layer. Over months and years, those deposits choke off the oil flow entirely, and the turbo seizes. This is the carbon buildup that kills turbochargers silently, and it is 100% preventable. And revving the engine right before shutting it off makes it even worse. That blip of the throttle spools the turbo to peak speed at the exact moment oil flow is about to go to zero. To prevent this, let the engine idle for 2 to 3 minutes after a heavy tow or a hard highway run before turning the key. This brief idle period keeps the cooling system and the oil pump running, pulling that extreme heat out of the turbo housing. Alternatively, tap an exhaust gas temperature gauge directly into the exhaust manifold. A pre-turbo probe gives the most accurate reading because factory sensors sit downstream where the turbine has already absorbed energy, so they underreport the true temperature. Do not shut off the engine until the exhaust temps drop below 400 degrees Fahrenheit. You do not necessarily need an aftermarket turbo timer. Those electronic boxes keep the engine idling after you walk away, but they carry security and insurance risks. Instead, some owners bolt on mechanical oil accumulators. These simple pressurized tanks sustain oil pressure to the bearings for several minutes after shutdown without keeping the engine running. But the easiest method is totally free. Just drive gently for the last mile before you park. That single habit will easily double the life of your turbocharger. Those are the 17 most destructive mistakes you can make with any turbo diesel. You now know more about protecting a turbocharged diesel engine than most people will ever learn. Fix these habits, and you will save yourself thousands in unnecessary shop bills. But here is the thing. Everything you just learned protects against hot shutdown damage, oil contamination, and turbo wear. But a single cold start mistake can undo all of it. Cold starts cause more engine wear than a hot shutdown, and almost nobody talks about it. Tap the video on screen right now. Discover the most common cold start mistakes drivers make every winter. Your engine's life depends on it.